In our last lesson, we learned about Abraham Lincoln and his debate with Stephen Douglas. In this debate, they talked about the issue of slavery. Lincoln believed that slavery was tearing the country apart, and he wanted to keep it from spreading to new states as they were added to the country. Remember, slavery was illegal or not allowed in the North, but it was legal in the South. The North and the South were different in other ways as well. The South's economy was based on growing crops such as cotton, sugar, and tobacco, and the North's economy was based on manufacturing. People in the South were worried about Lincoln's views, and abolitionists were growing in number in the North and wanted to end slavery. In our last read aloud, we heard, even those who were not against slavery or did not think that it was wrong would have a hard time trying to prove that it was not tearing the country apart. In an earlier speech, Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." What do you think that phrase means? A house divided against itself cannot stand. Make a prediction about what you think is going to happen to the country because of people's differing views on slavery. And then we will go over our vocabulary words. Elected. An elected person is chosen by a vote to do something or to serve in a certain position. For example, in the United States, we vote to elect a president. Heritage. Heritage is something that is inherited or passed down. It could be traditions or ways of doing things that have not changed over time. Seceded. To secede means to withdraw or stop being a member of a particular group. People have seceded from groups throughout history, usually to form a new group. Union. Union is the name given to the northern states that did not secede from the United States. The Union was prepared to fight to keep the states together. Confederacy. Confederacy is the name of the states of the South that seceded from the United States. During the Civil War, all battles were between the Union and the Confederacy. Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election in 1860 to become the 16th president of the United States. Unfortunately, the election only proved how divided the country really was. Lincoln believed that slavery should not be expanded to the new states being formed in the West. Many people in the North agreed with this idea and voted for Lincoln. In the South, many people disliked Lincoln, and in fact, people could not even vote for Lincoln in 9 states in the South because his name was not on their list of candidates. Despite not being on the ballot in 9 states, and without the support of a single Southern state, on November 8, 1860, Lincoln was elected, or chosen, president, because there were more people living in the North who voted for him. Many of the Southern states strongly believed that the North and President Lincoln wanted to take away their right to set their own laws and wanted to abolish slavery. The conflict was worsening. A couple of months after Lincoln was elected president, something unbelievable happened, something Lincoln and many others had feared and hoped would never happen. Several Southern states seceded or declared that they were no longer part of the United States. South Carolina was the first state to secede. The states of Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas soon followed. All 7 states supported slavery, and all believed that the U.S. government under Lincoln would force them into doing things they did not want to do, such as abolish slavery. Remember, abolish means to get rid of. These Southern states intensely believed that they should be in charge of themselves, so they broke away and declared that they were forming their own country, They called their new country the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy for short. The Confederacy elected its own president, a man named Jefferson Davis. This is a picture of Jefferson Davis, the elected president of the Confederate States of America. But Lincoln was not going to allow the United States of America to be broken up into two separate countries. Lincoln said that it was against national law for a state to secede. Therefore, he said that he would do everything in his power to unify the country. He hoped that he would be able to do this peacefully without a war. Nobody wanted a war, including Jefferson Davis, but as the months passed, it became clear that it would be impossible to avoid it. To learn what happened next, it is important to know about an event that took place in the city of Charleston, South Carolina, in April of 1861, just after Lincoln became president. Charleston was a beautiful, charming, and wealthy city in the South. If Charleston is a wealthy city, that means that they had a good economy. Its residents were proud of their beautiful city and proud of their Southern heritage. Remember, heritage is the set of traditions that are passed down through generations. The people of Charleston were proud of the South and how things were done in the South. They were also proud of their good economy. Charleston was an important port city. From its harbor, valuable goods such as cotton, sugar, and tobacco, which had been grown and harvested by enslaved Africans on plantations, were carried by ships across the sea to countries in Europe. Important ports like Charleston needed protection, so they built forts along the shore. The largest and most important of these forts was called Fort Sumter. Forts like these, with their large cannons and soldiers, were built to protect the harbor from invasion by pirates and enemy ships in times of war. Although Fort Sumter was in South Carolina, a Confederate state, the fort still belonged to the United States. The Confederates wanted Fort Sumter for themselves. They knew that they could not have a real country of their own as long as U.S. soldiers were guarding the fort and controlling its guns. Fort Sumter also created a problem for President Lincoln. It was a fort located in an area now claimed by the Confederacy. President Lincoln now had three options. 1. Tell the U.S. soldiers to leave the fort. 2. Send more U.S. soldiers to defend the fort against Confederate soldiers. Or 3. Send supplies, such as food, to the fort to see if the Confederate soldiers would try to stop them. This was a difficult decision. If President Lincoln chose the first option, having U.S. soldiers leave the fort, he would be saying that he agreed with South Carolina's decision to secede. If he chose the second option, sending more troops to defend the fort, the Confederacy might accuse him of starting a war. President Lincoln chose the third option, sending new supplies to see if the Confederacy would let the ships through. At the same time, the Confederates raised an army of their own. They surrounded Fort Sumter and tried to convince the soldiers inside to surrender. But the soldiers said they had orders from President Lincoln to stay put, and that is exactly what those soldiers did. If they're staying put, that means that they are staying where they're at and they are not moving. When the Confederacy heard President Lincoln was planning to send more supplies to the fort, the Confederacy opened fire. Early on the morning of April 12, 1861, before the sun had even risen, a woman named Mary Boykin Chestnut sat upright in her bed, as though she'd awakened from a bad dream. Then she heard a sound, the same type of sound that had shaken her from her sleep. A distant, low boom, as described in her diary. Thinking it must be thunder, she put her head back down on the pillow. The room was pitch black, but through the window she could see that the sun was just barely beginning to rise, casting a light blue, slightly yellow light in the eastern sky. Suddenly, there was a series of very loud explosions. Boom! 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 These sounds were much closer. Mary Chestnut knew then that the sounds were from cannons, not thunder. The cannons in the small fort nearest the town were opening fire, and Mrs. Chestnut knew that these were Confederate cannons. Mary walked out onto the upstairs porch in time to see the light from the nearby cannons as they fired another volley into the early morning air. Mary was witnessing the bombardment of Fort Sumter. All morning, all afternoon, and all through the night, for 34 straight hours, the Confederate cannons fired on Fort Sumter. The U.S. soldiers in the fort had cannons of their own, and they fired back. The air around Charleston filled with smoke from the explosions of the massive guns. Massive means that they were really, really big. As the house rattled from the boom of the guns, Mary Chestnut sat down and wrote in her journal, "Fort Sumter has been on fire." Then, in the early evening of April 13th, all of the guns fell silent, and the U.S. soldiers in Fort Sumter finally surrendered. Amazingly, nobody on either side had been killed or seriously injured by enemy fire. Damaged Fort Sumter now belonged to the Confederacy. More important, it became clear that war could not be avoided. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, more Southern states joined the Confederacy. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, as well as portions or parts of Kentucky and Missouri. In all, there were 13 Confederate states, all from the South. It is important to remember that the states of Kentucky and Missouri did not actually secede from the United States, even though some people from those states decided to fight for the Confederacy. The remaining states, those that had not seceded, were in the North, and they became known as the Union. The Confederacy made a flag to symbolize its new country. The Confederate flag, pictured at the bottom left, has 7 stars to symbolize the first set of states that seceded from the Union. The flag pictured at the bottom right, with 13 stars, symbolizes the Confederacy after the Battle of Fort Sumter, when more states joined. States in the Union continued to fly the traditional flag of the United States, pictured at the top, which at the time of the Civil War had 34 stars, 1 for each state, including the Confederate States. With the Battle of Fort Sumter, a new and painful chapter of American history began. Mary Chestnut, for her part, continued to write in her journal, keeping a record of the Civil War through the eyes of a Southerner. By the end of the war, Charleston, where it all began, was very fortunate that it was not burned to the ground like many other cities in the South. Alright, my friends, in our last lesson, we learned that Lincoln's opinion on slavery was that he felt that it was causing the nation to be torn apart and divided. Was he correct? Yes. The controversy over slavery and the disagreements eventually led to a split or a divide in our country. What important job was Lincoln elected to a couple of years after losing the Senate race to Douglas? He was elected or chosen to be President of the United States of America. I have got a picture of a flag here. We talked about how the split in our nation split into the Union and the Confederacy. Does this show the flag of the Union or the flag of the Confederacy? This is the flag of the Union. This looks a little bit different than the flag we have today. On this flag there are 34 stars. The Confederacy, however, their flag only had 13 stars to represent the 13 states that had become a part of the Confederacy. What was the Union a name for? Was the Union the people that wanted to separate from the United States and from their own country? No, the Union were the people that wanted the United States to stay together. All right, my friends. What name did the states that seceded give their new country? So remember, they broke away from the United States and decided they were going to be their own country. What did they call that country? They called it the Confederate States of America. What about this flag? Is that a Union flag also? No, this one shows the Confederacy flag, the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag, again, has 13 stars to represent the 13 states that were a part of the Confederate States of America. Just like the Union's flag, the Confederate flag went through a couple of changes. So you will see as we go on a couple of other versions of the Confederate flag. Just like our United States flag changed over time as we added more states. All right, why did the Confederates fire cannons on Fort Sumter? They wanted to take over Fort Sumter. What did Mary Chestnut see and hear during the bombardment of Fort Sumter? She could hear the cannons and see the fire and smoke. Why do you think she took the time to write about that in her journal? And how do you think she felt? All right, my friends, go ahead and open up the PDF that is attached to this assignment. I'm going to jump over to my computer and I'll show you what to do on those pages today. The very first page of our assignment today is turned on its side. So the very first thing we need to do is flip it so that we can look at it. To do that, we'll go over to our hamburger menu up in the top right corner, those three lines. And we'll click on this circular arrow that says rotate clockwise. And that will turn our map so it is right side up. This map shows the states and territories of the United States before the Civil War and during the time of the Civil War. Today we learned that the United States was split in two, the Union, or the North, and the Confederacy, or the South. The Union was called the North because the Union states were located in the northern part of the United States, and the Confederacy was called the South because the Confederate States were in the southern part of the United States. If we look at this map, we will notice that some of these states have these lines and a dot in the middle. If we look over at our key or our legend, we can see that that symbol, the lines and the dot, represent Union states. The Union was often represented by the color blue. I'm going to have you take your drawing tool and pick a blue color. And I want you to do a check mark or another dot in the Union states. Union states included Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island is really small, Connecticut, and New Jersey. We also have some states like Texas, that have this dot pattern and a triangle in the middle. If we look at our legend or our key, we can see that that symbol represents states that were part of the Confederacy. A color that was used to represent the Confederacy is the color gray. Their uniforms in the war were gray. We're going to do a check mark in our Confederate states in the color gray. States that were part of the Confederacy included Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. We have marked all of our Union states and all our Confederacy states, but we still have some states in the middle that have not been marked. Those states were called border states. These states did not secede from the United States or separate and become part of the Confederate States, but in these states, many parts of the states agreed with slavery and agreed with the Confederacy. We're going to mark these ones. They've got a different pattern around the border and a square in the middle. We're going to mark these ones in green. We call these border states. They didn't support the North, and they did support the Confederacy. Parts of the states did support the Confederacy, but they did not secede and become part of the Confederacy. We're going to mark these in green. These border states are Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland. All right, my friends, when you have your map all marked, you've got your Union states marked, your Confederate states marked, and those border states in green. Go ahead and scroll down to the next page in our assignment. This one, we're going to have to flip back. So go up to Menu. This time we're going to click on the one that says Rotate Counterclockwise. And then we'll put it right side up. For today's journal entry, we are going to talk about some of the differences between the Union and the Confederacy. We compared the North and the South in a previous lesson. You might want to use some of the same information that we used in our comparisons then in our comparisons now. Some other things you might want to think about, let's read a couple of statements. I'll read some statements that are true, either about the Union or about the Confederacy. I want you to think about which group these statements are about. Let's try this first one. Abraham Lincoln's name did not appear on the ballot in the election for presidency in our region, so we could not vote for him. That was the Confederacy. In our region, there was a growing number of abolitionists. Remember, abolitionists are people who wanted to abolish or end slavery, and that was the Union. Our economy was based on manufacturing. That one was the Union again. Remember, they had lots of big factories where things were manufactured or made. We had many large plantations in our region and grew cotton, sugar, and tobacco. That one is true about the Confederacy. All right, last one. Fort Sumter was located in our region, so we wanted to claim it for ourselves. That one was the Confederacy. Think about some of the differences between the Confederacy and the Union. that we talked about today or in previous lessons. Today you're going to write 3 to 5 complete sentences, as always. Make sure you have a subject, a predicate, a capital, and a final mark. You're going to use those 3 to 5 complete sentences to compare some of the differences between the Union and the Confederacy. When you're done, I want you to draw a picture in the box that will help you remember what we've talked about. You may want to split your box right down the middle, split it in half. And you may want to draw something to remind you what the North was like, or the Union, on one side, and something to remind you what the South, or the Confederacy was like on the other. When you are finished, you are all finished with knowledge today, and I will see you next time.